We are about to embrace the bullet presentation of our event. Different from the morning with Dr. Lori Law, the Real Talks will rapidly inform you about resiliency, empathy, artificial intelligence, which is our first one, and law. And so I just want to introduce our first presenter, Charles Gluckstein, a visionary in personal injury law. Charles is the owner and managing partner of Gluckstein Lawyers, continuing the legacy of his father, Bernard. Recognized in Best Lawyers in Canada and Lexpert, he is a specialist in civil litigation with a strong track record in injury and judge-alone trials. A sought-after speaker, he shares insights on personal injury law and legal technology at conferences across Ontario, across the U.S. too, right? Yes, across the U.S. He's an international tech expert.
Thanks so much, Di.
Okay, please enjoy. Please
Can everyone hear
me.
me? Well, good afternoon, everyone. That was a great morning with Lori, and now we're going to talk about some things that may stress you out. And you may want to think about clutching your heart and taking your feet and grounding them and taking some deep breaths. I do have some suggestions on how to deal with all the stress of technology, and I'll go through that in my presentation. So, experts predict that AI will outperform humans in the next 10 years. We already have a lot of technology around us. We have our ChatGPT on our phone. We use our phones for everything. Who remembers when we didn't have cell phones? Do you know it was only 2007? Feels like we've had them for such a long time. We can't imagine being without them. Like, we go everywhere with them. It has our passwords. It has all of our thoughts and our memories. Everything is in there. We look everything up. It's quite powerful. So just think 10 years from now, they won't be phones anymore, but what we'll be able to do with AI. So in the healthcare industry, it's quite interesting how it's going to transform our industry. We already see how it's affecting us in the legal industry, but in the healthcare industry, early detection, I've got something on my neck here. I'm going to turn it on. It's called a Ploud. And you may see healthcare providers wearing these things, and they transcribe in real time all your conversations, and they give you a summary of your conversations. So doctors taking a history, a nurse taking a history, an OT taking a history. You would have a full transcript of that conversation, as it's going to transcribe my presentation right now, and a summary with a list of to-dos on your web app as soon as you click the button to stop it. You can wear it, you can put it on your, like a watch. I just got this yesterday and tried it out. It was awesome. So these tools are available both as a hardware thing and as a software thing, and they're going to be all around us, and they already are. And so you can see how it affects all of the different parts of our healthcare industry. So AI, we think, well, why do we need it? Well, we need it to solve some of the world's biggest problems, because our brains are limited in infrastructure and how much it can actually process in power. We process something like 10 to the power of 14, and we need to process at the ability of 10 to the power of 24 to put all our brains in one processing machine. And that's what AI promises to do, and it promises that when we can do that, we will solve a lot of the world's problems. Hunger, famine, will solve some problems of disease, and a lot of good things will be done. There's obviously some bad things that can be done if it's misused, but we think it's the next step of our evolution, and technology will get us there. How do we get there? If we look at the history of when we go back and we had a calculator invented in the 1600s, and then the architecture for a computer was conceived in the 1800s. It wasn't actually used until they came up with a vacuum tube machine during World War II, when Alan Turing was able to break the enigma, the Nazi code, in order to change the tide of the World War II. And he used that with vacuum tubes. And we've gone through iterations where vacuum tubes finally became microprocessors, and all of the iterations that we've seen over time. And we've seen it as a very slow progression, because in our minds, technology never promises, it never delivers as much as we think it's going to deliver what it's promised to do. But you can see over time where we've gone. And we see this history on this next slide. If you look back at what it took to get from the agricultural revolution to the industrial revolution, it's about 8,000 years. And then from there to invent the light bulb, only another 120 years. And then we figured out how to get to the moon in the next 90 years. And then all of a sudden, 22 years later, we have the internet. And now, 9 years after that, we've solved the human genome. And now we're going to be doing something called the singularity, which is this idea that we will have the processing speed ability of all of our human minds together. So if you look at the right side of that chart, you will see processing speed. So a mouse has the processing speed of something like 10 to the power of 11. And if you told a mouse today that I'm going to give you human intelligence for a year and let you try that out and see if you like it, and a year later you said to the mouse, I'm taking that back, you're going back to 10 to the power of 11 from 10 to the power of 14, what do you think the mouse is going to say to you? Do you think they're going to be happy with that? Or do you think they're going to be happy to be able to process things like a human? We're going to be in that same position, and a lot of us are shaking our heads saying, I don't want that. I don't want to be thinking at 10 to the power of 24, because I don't want to listen to a book where it sounds like a machine that's flying through. I don't know if you've ever listened to audiobooks and you put it, Richard listens to it at 3 times the speed. He's got a different processing power, but I listen to it at 1. I tried 1.5, and I find that even challenging, unless it's someone that's a very slow speaker. I won't name who those people are, but then those ones I would speed up. But most of them, I'm okay with 1. But at 10 to the power of 24, you will feel like an alien, because you will be listening to them rapidly, like probably 10 times the speed that we listen to it. So you'll absorb books much quicker, and that's why AI works the way it does. It has that processing speed. But the same question will be asked of you. If you have that power and a year later I tell you you don't have it anymore, you will probably still want it. And as much as you're scared about it, the next generation won't be. And the next generation after that will embrace it. And eventually we will have to merge with this technology, and we won't have an external interface like a phone. We will have an internal interface. It'll connect to our brains directly. And you can read about this. It sounds very far-fetched, but it's only 10 years away. So it's not that far-fetched. So how does it affect healthcare? Diagnosis, behavior recognition, disease outbreak and recognition, human support robots. So the idea that nursing can be done 24 hours a day with an AI machine that's as empathetic as a healthcare worker. And people say, well, how could that happen? How could an AI robot have empathy? They actually did experiments on this. I have a video here
waves everywhere else
about AI chat therapy.
In Health News this noon, could an AI chatbot be your new therapist? Researchers at Dartmouth tested a therapy chatbot and found it actually did help patients with depression, anxiety, and eating disorders. Patients would text the chatbot through an app. Researchers say the AI still needs oversight from a real person, but that it could help those who don't have access to a mental health professional.
So why would that be attractive to someone? First of all, we don't all have access to healthcare. We don't all have access to social workers and psychologists to talk to, and sometimes we're afraid to do that, or it's the cost. So you open up an app and you think, well, how is that app going to have empathy? Well, it doesn't come with any emotional intelligence that's negative, right? So we have biases when we come to these meetings. Something happened at home, my commute was awful, and now I got to take my first appointment. You're weighing that emotional intelligence on you, and that first patient you're distracted. That AI, high-level AI, not current-level chatbot, but where it's going, will be able to be totally unbiased. No emotional intelligence distractions. Emotional intelligence in a good way, but not in a negative way. And they say, so they did this test, and you can look it up, where they compared real psychology help versus the AI help. And the person didn't know which was which. That's the Turing test, is if the computer can emulate what a human would do, then you've passed the Turing test of AI. And so these individuals that participated in the study, the overwhelming Dartmouth study proved that the AI psychologist actually had better outcomes with the user experience than the psychologist. Now, that doesn't mean there's no room for a psychologist. It means that we're more available, more accessible, we can supervise it. And now everyone's stressed out, I know. I've got some coping mechanisms, but the truth is that this stuff's only going to get better. And so all your experience with, hey Siri, do this, hey Siri, do that, and you find it's crap, it gets better, right? And now we're relying on it. So how does this impact on compassion fatigue? Well, what I tell my staff is that AI is not going to replace you. I'm not planning to downsize my office. In fact, we've gone from a firm of 25 people to 60 people over COVID. So why did I do that? Well, technology actually allowed us to be more efficient, more productive, and allowed us to take on practice areas that we weren't previously doing. So AI will increase your workload. It may increase your stress because the expectations are higher. And where is that emotional support for all that extra work? So you can imagine in a healthcare setting the same things, right? Now you've got all these tools to dictate, to take notes, to write your reports. Okay, well, what are you going to do with all that extra time? Take on more patients, right? That's what the expectation is going to be. Be more productive, right? And why can't you answer my call when I'm calling and all of that? So that's where compassion fatigue comes in, because you still have to be resilient. You still have to know how to say no. That's the limit of my work ability. I can't continue to take on more and more. And do we get reliant on AI machines? So what if the problem with using the technology to talk to it and have it as your buddy, there was another report, I forget which tech reporter, tried this sort of online psychologist, and when he continued using the therapist, they loved it. But after a certain amount of time, the therapist forgot everything in the previous sessions. So it almost had to reboot, right? It was like, they'd gone on for, say, 6 sessions, but then after that, it was a completely new personality. It's like seeing a new psychologist. They had to start all over again. And so how frustrating would that be if you get too reliant on the AI and something goes wrong with it, right? You don't have that history. So that's a problem. There's ethical issues. You could get too connected to it. It dehumanizes the whole process. There's a distrust in the machines, right? We all have that. But will the next generation have it? So what would you do to mitigate against the risks of being so dependent on AI? So focusing on human-centered care to enhance the emotional support. So the idea that, yes, technology can be involved in this process, even as lawyers. It can help us screen the cases. It can do sort of the first level of the intake. But eventually, the lawyer has to be there. In fact, I think the healthcare provider and the lawyer at the top of the profession chain, you think of AI as a delegation tool. It's a tool that makes your work easier so you can get to the brunt of what you are really supposed to do, counsel the client or counsel the patient. So you'll be doing more of that. As a lawyer, we're going to be doing more of that counseling because all the other busy work can be done by machines. And the same thing should be true in the healthcare industry. Try to make sure it's unbiased. AI has a big problem of programming language, right? So engineers, it all comes down to what's in the box, right? Garbage goes in. If you've created it by, an engineer that has, a very bent, right wing bend and doesn't have a care for the patient, then that machine has got that engineer's algorithm, and it's only as good as the programmer. So how do we go into these machines to make sure they're unbiased and trained properly? And then again, the same self-care strategies that Lori talked about, you can apply here. So cultivate open communication. Make sure that when these devices are being introduced, Obviously, you want to make sure your patient agrees that you can record all of these conversations. I get on a call, there's a warning actually before the call starts that this call is being recorded, and you have to hit OK if you agree. If you don't agree, then it's not recorded. You can't surreptitiously do that. You have to get permission. And encourage teamwork when you're bringing in these technologies. So have a meeting with your staff. We're now using this technology to help with patient records, et cetera, et cetera. How is it going to be used? What are the concerns? Is it an open system, meaning does it get exposed on the internet, or is it a closed system where the system isn't being trained on your data? These are all good questions that your team members need to be able to answer. So I think I covered this before, but the idea that you get connected to these machines, this is going to be an interesting problem as we move into the world of robots, and robots that are somewhat intelligent, more intelligent than we are, and we get connected to them. That reliance and that lack of human involvement, right? So at some stage, as individuals, we have to decide, what is it that we want to delegate? Do we want to delegate all these things? There was an interesting, I'm trying to think which podcast it was on. It may have been The Daily, but it was a podcast about the future of parenting, because it's pretty much a given that, I don't know when it's going to be, but 20 years from now, we will all have robots in our houses helping us with the stuff we don't want to do. The housekeeping, the cooking, taking our dogs out when we're not home. And what about watching our kids and teaching our kids? And our kids could be attached to these robots. And do we want to give up parenting our kids? And so at some stage, we have a choice as to how much we want to let these things take over and what we want to delegate to them. I mean, we will have a lot of freedoms. We will have a lot of time with all these machines. That's the promise. But what do we want to give up? Do we want to give up arguing our cases? No. Right? Do we want to give up parenting and bonding with our kids? No. So there's got to be some division as to where the line is. The ethical challenges are enormous. Unless you live in the United States or China, then they don't care. So Canada has followed the European model. There's a lot of safeguards, there's a lot of rules and privacy concerns. The US has no privacy law except HIPAA. Your data is never safe. In fact, if you're traveling to the US, they can go into your phone, look at your WhatsApp chat, and decide whatever else they want to do with you based on your conversations. And this isn't fake news. This is true. Because after 9/11, they got rid of all privacy laws. And the only thing they protect is your healthcare privacy. So HIPAA protects your health records, but there's no safeguards for AI. And in a way, that keeps them in line with the pace of technology in China, so they can compete, because those are really the two superpowers when it comes to technology. Those are going to be the two worlds that you subscribe to as AI gets bigger and bigger. However, that's probably not how it should go. We have all sorts of rules and regulations in place to protect confidentiality, to make sure there's no bias in the programming, to oversee how AI influences different areas of our of what we do. And this is just an example of how bias can be affected. So you can have data that was acquired in a discriminatory fashion. You can do it by design, which I've told you about. And the application injustice, I have an example of that. There's courts in Texas that rely on an AI tool to do sentencing guidelines. You plug it all in and it tells you the answer, and it's all done from a small group of data from another state where it was all one race that was being prosecuted for a certain type of crime, and they've expanded it to include all of these offenses. And guess what? That application is so popular, the rest of the US wants access to it. And some of the Canadian courts have wanted to look at it. But it's all come from one little sector in Texas, and you can imagine, like, what went into that? How did it get created? We've got the same problem with our rules that are being threatened. They're using one small little example out of other jurisdictions to try to take away oral discoveries in Canada, in Ontario. They have no data, they have no proof and that it's going to work. But they're pushing for it because this is the demand to keep judges' workload down and to make the courts work efficiently no matter what, even though there may not be justice to the ones that are using the court. AI aversion. So this is about the distrust and reluctance to engage in it. And that can create stress, right? So and this slide, by the way, was created by, so I don't go to the Google Images anymore to get my slides. I use Copilot. I tell it what I want and it gives me an original image. So I don't have any copyright issues. So probably, I mean, that's probably why that word is illegible, that you see in the background there. But there's going to be stress, right, from all these changes, and healthcare providers are going to deal with that, right? Like, I'm sure my staff are stressed at the way I'm bringing in technology like this. Now, it makes our lives easier, but you have to learn about it, you have to change your workflows, and it can create all sorts of anxiety about that. So this is a new area that you have to deal with. So AI has got all sorts of future potential. Advancements will be relevant for trauma support. So the idea that workloads are going to increase, but yet you could maybe vet the cases through an AI chatbot. You could probably have almost like an assistant help you give some of the sessions, and then you supervise those sessions, or you come in to give other direction as needed. There's all sorts of potentials. Anything, if you think of what the potential of it is, anything that you delegate is really potential for technology to take that away and help you be more efficient. So you think, well, then what does the person I'm delegating do? Well, they do more of the real work. So I think of my own workflow where I have a law clerk and a legal assistant, and I need letters sent, and I need records collected, and I need them summarized, and I need briefs sent out and letters written to counsel, and I don't really need them to do that anymore, because now I can use technology to do all those things. So then, well, why do I need them? Well, I need them to do much more about the case. Who's going to interview all the witnesses? Who's going to set up the meetings and get them, properly arranged for me? There's all sorts of investigation and deeper work that we can do on the case that we weren't doing, right? Because we were so caught up in the busy work that now we can actually provide much better value to our clients, and you could as a healthcare provider than you did before. How many times do we hear about these long waiting lists and people that can't get responses from professionals? So now that hopefully can be addressed through technology, right? And I think that's my time.
Next up is Richard Halpern, a distinguished senior lawyer. Richard has over 30 years of experience advocating for injured individuals in medical negligence cases, with a focus on birth injuries. Recognized across Canada for his expertise, he provides invaluable guidance to families navigating complex legal and medical challenges. In one sentence, he's the best.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Is this on? Can you hear me okay? Well, I got to talk a little bit about the law, litigation, and malpractice cases. And litigation and malpractice cases is a special kind of trauma. It's a trauma for everybody involved. It's a trauma for the doctors, the nurses, the doulas, the midwives, the parents. It's purely profound trauma. When young parents come to see me and they have a bad outcome during labor and delivery, one of the things we often have to cope with is mom inevitably blames herself in these cases, right? She wants to take some responsibility for the outcome, and I've never seen a case where mom is to blame. So part of what we do is we have to reassure them that there's nothing that they could have done. I've never seen a case where liability didn't rest with the healthcare providers. So I'm going to talk about perspective, really, from the legal point of view. And what I mean by that is, Healthcare providers can do no more than their jobs. Provided you do your job and you meet the legal standard of care. And when I say legal standard of care, it is also your professional standard of care. They're the same things. If you meet the standard of care, then you've done all that you can. When a patient comes to see a healthcare professional, often they have some underlying problem, whether it's a disease or it's trauma, they have some underlying problem. And what the patient is looking for is empathy and understanding. The compassion that all healthcare providers bring to that relationship is the desire to alleviate the suffering to the extent that they can, but only to the extent that they can. They're not miracle workers. What we do in the legal sphere that's a little different is we try to bring some relief in the way of financial respite. In the situation where we act for the parents and children who are profoundly injured from birth trauma, obviously that is a huge burden on the family. Most of these children have cerebral palsy. That's a lifelong motor and neurodevelopmental disorder. And it is a 24-hour-a-day job to care for these kids. And what we try to do is we try to get the parents respite so that there is enough money at the end of the day that allows them to get the care that they need for these children and to give them a break. And that's the relief of suffering that we can provide to them. So for you folks in the job that you do, you have to recognize that you have a duty of care to your patients. You must not breach that duty of care, and I'm going to talk about what it is. And then even if the duty of care is breached, a patient, in order to get compensation, has to demonstrate that some harm flowed from the breach of the duty of care. That's called causation in law. And finally, they would have to establish that there's some economic loss or pain and suffering that flows from a breach of the duty of care. What we do is we look at whether the duty of care has been breached. We establish through experts whether it's been breached. We establish through experts whether causation can be made out, and then we have to assess the needs of the injured party in order to ensure that there is a lifetime of compensation available to them to provide for their needs. So you owe a duty of care to your patient, and that means that you have to conduct yourself in a way that is in accordance with reasonable peers of similar qualifications to you. It's based on the expected knowledge that is in place at the time that the care is being provided. What that means is that we don't look at care retrospectively 2, 3, or 4 years later when the lawsuit commences. We don't look at what the care is today. If you are being criticized for care, we look at the standard of care that existed at the time that you provided care to your patient. And you would be compared to other professionals with similar credentials unless you hold yourself out to be somebody possessed of greater specialty. So an example would be that if a general practitioner is delivering a baby and decides to do a cesarean section, that general practitioner would be held to the standard of an obstetrician and not a family doctor. So you must not hold yourself out to possess greater skill than you actually do, which means know your limitations and make a referral when it's appropriate. So you have to act prudently and you have to act diligently. And what I press? Okay, so breach of the duty of care. So I think that I want to relate duty of care to what healthcare providers do. You want to either cure or you want to make somebody better than they are to mitigate the harm, or you want to slow deterioration. That perhaps is the goal, or it may be palliative. These are the different levels of care that might be provided, and you can only do what the circumstances demand. What care providers, again, this is about perspective now, what care providers need to understand is that even the best care at times cannot deliver better outcomes. It's just the way it is. If somebody presents with an underlying disease and no amount of care can improve the outcome or mitigate the loss, that may just be a fact of life, and it has nothing to do with whether you've provided adequate care. Also, I mentioned on this slide about errors in judgment. So what I'm referring to when I talk about errors in judgment is there may be 2 or 3 different courses of action or ways to manage a patient's care. And if each of the courses of management are reasonable in the circumstances, but you opt for one that did not result in an outcome, a good outcome, and another option would have resulted in a good outcome, you will not be liable for that, provided it was reasonable to choose the path you chose. Okay, if it's reasonable by applicable standards to choose the treatment path you chose, then there will be no liability. That's an error in judgment. So the law does not impose liability on healthcare providers unless you've actually breached the standard of care. It will not hold you responsibility for errors in judgment. And so I want to digress a little bit about that, because I often talk to people about the phenomenon in the United States, which is not a phenomenon in Canada, that there's so much liability, there's so much medical liability or medical-related liability in the United States that people advance this notion of defensive medicine. Well, people start practicing defensive medicine. They offer too many tests. There are too many referrals. My attitude is there is no excuse for defensive medicine, that nobody should practice defensive medicine. If you're meeting the standard of care, that's all you need to do. You don't have to overdo it. You just need to pay attention to the standard of care. And by the way, there's very few lawsuits in Canada compared to the United States. Very few medical malpractice lawsuits in this country. Less than 1,000 cases a year in the entire country. And most of those cases don't result in a verdict in favor of the patient. So it's not a big problem in Canada. Causation is what the patient must prove as a link between the wrongful conduct, the breach of the standard of care, and the harm. So the patient must prove that there is a link, and if they can't prove that on what's called a but-for basis, that means but for the negligence, the bad outcome would not have happened, they can't win the case. And these causation is often the biggest challenge that we face on the patient side of medical malpractice cases, because it can be difficult to prove. In what I do, it can be difficult to prove when and how a baby gets hurt, because there are very limited ways to evaluate fetal well-being in utero. We have very limited ways in evaluating fetal well-being in utero. And what we have to do in these cases is put together a puzzle, a clinical puzzle. What happened during mom's pregnancy, what happened during labor and delivery, what the neonatal data shows, what imaging of the baby's brain shows. We need to bring all these things together and try to infer from that data when and how the baby got hurt. And we also face in these cases an extreme challenge from the medical side of things. The doctors, there's a lot of medical literature out there that is a hurdle to patients proving a link between bad obstetrical care and bad outcomes. Much of it junk science. And some of you may have heard me talk about that before. So we have to keep that in perspective. And then assuming that the patient can prove both a breach of the standard of care and causation, the patient must then prove that damages have been suffered. In our cases involving babies, that's usually pretty easy to do. These babies have a lifetime of care, and that is, the quantum may be an issue, but the fact that they need a lot of money in the way of damages is generally not an issue. So what we have to do, let's leave baby cases aside, but any other kind of case where the patient presents with an underlying disease and then claims harm, we have to demonstrate that in the ordinary trajectory of disease, the patient would have gone along one path. But with the malpractice, that trajectory has changed. And the difference between the trajectory with the underlying disease without negligence and the underlying disease with negligence is the measure of the damage. It's the difference between the two. And that can be challenging too. A great example, cancer cases, misdiagnosis of cancer cases. These are very difficult cases in which to prove damages. But that's another challenge for the plaintiff's lawyer. So coming full circle back to the subject matter of this talk is about perspective, is that good outcomes aren't guaranteed. That may help with compassion fatigue. That may help put things in perspective. You cannot guarantee a good outcome. Care providers can only do their best and no more. You can't do miracles. If you maintain the standards of your professional associations, if you keep up with the literature, if you're conscientious in your record keeping and note taking, if you stay up to date, you will not be liable, and you don't have to see me on the other side of the table in one of these cases. So sometimes only comfort can be provided, and if you recognize these realities, then you will have at least some perspective. It may not go a long way to alleviate fatigue from compassion, but I think it's important to keep it in perspective. Thank you.
Simona Jellinek is next up, really. Simona has shaped key legislation in the fight for justice, including the removal of the limitation period in sexual abuse cases and critical ODSP amendments. Recognized Best Lawyers in Lexbert, she received the Distinguished Service Award and Zenith Lexbert Award. A sought-after media expert and academic, she lectures and presents globally on sexual violence litigation. But more importantly, she was Adrienne Patterson, who you met after lunch. She was her lawyer, and that's how satisfied she is with her representation. And would Betty and Jackie please stand up? They are providers, and they are equally as impressed with Simona. And you've just heard about the peer review that you got. What about your most recent award? Thought.
Yeah. Thought leader.
She doesn't know which one.
It was a thought leader award for Mondac. I think that's what it's called. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Diane.
You're very welcome.
And thank you all, everybody, for being here. And I just wanted to say that Adrienne was represented by a team of us. It's not just always one lawyer. It's always a group effort on our part. I started in personal injury law 31 years ago. And I was at a law firm that only did medical malpractice. I think my two principals, the two lawyers that I worked under, were brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I think they may have actually more experience than Richard, but I don't know, give or take about the same. But they were brilliant, you know. But what I learned from them was how to do a medical malpractice case. And when I was a young lawyer with them, one of the things that I was tasked to do is to pick up what were called line 9 calls at the time. So we had a different phone number for yellow pages. Anybody here remember the yellow pages? So if it was a yellow pages call, they would be directed to me. And that was because mostly the yellow pages calls were not necessarily good cases, but once in a while there was. In any event, I picked up this line 9 call, and this what sounded like a pretty young mother was on the phone, and she explained to me what happened to her and her baby during the birth. And, you know, I asked all the questions, and I sort of outlined the procedure and, you know, what we could do and what we couldn't do and what we had to prove and what we didn't have to prove, and sort of went into that for a little bit. And at the end of the call, her tone changed completely. And she said to me something like this, and I can't remember the exact words, but the sentiment still haunts me today. She said to me, you obviously know what you're talking about. You're obviously a good lawyer, but you have no warmth in your voice. And I got to tell you, that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was personally traumatized for the rest of the day, if not for weeks afterwards. Because for me, having empathy and being kind and good and really putting other people first is really important. Possibly because I'm the child of narcissistic parents. I don't know, but whatever. I'll leave that for you guys, the experts, to tell me. But when she said that to me, it really did fundamentally change me. I made a decision shortly thereafter that, notwithstanding that what I was learning from those lawyers was how to be an excellent lawyer, it wasn't the way that I wanted to practice law. And I quit. And it came as a shock to everybody that I quit that firm, given who they were. But I couldn't do it. I didn't want to do it. And I started my own firm. And at the time, I basically took whatever kind of case, including employment cases, came through the door because, I had to pay rent. But very quickly, shortly thereafter, like months into my private practice firm, I started a sexual assault case. I took it over from a friend of mine. And I took it over, and I had no clue what I was doing. I didn't even know that sexual assault was an area of law. But apparently it kind of wasn't back then, but it is now. And the other fundamental thing that doesn't haunt me, but empowers me and makes me strive for the best, is that when I took that case over and I had a meeting with that client, her name was Debbie, and my friend, the lawyer who was giving me the case, my friend said to Debbie, you're in good hands. Simona's going to do a great job for you. You're a survivor. And Debbie, who was high as a kite and had just come from St. Michael's Hospital, where she had been hospitalized for, I don't remember which number suicide attempt, looked up and said, I don't want to survive. I want to live. And that really struck me. And that's kind of why I do this kind of work. And in the last 30 some odd years, I've built my team, and we are so happy to be with Gluckstein now. And my team is myself and 4 lawyers. And what we do is we practice sexual abuse work. It's all we do. We don't touch the other areas of Gluckstein. We're happy to leave that to the experts in those others area. And in doing so, we always practice trauma-informed law. And it's funny because trauma-informed law has been a buzzword in the last, 4 or 5 years, something like that. And when I first heard it, I kind of scratched my head and said, what's that? And then somebody explained it to me, and I said, oh, kind of like what I've been doing my whole career. And it's funny because I look at it and I think, this is how everybody should practice law. And it's not. And I'm going to argue with you, I'm going to argue with anybody, that every lawyer out there, including corporate lawyers, the big guys and their big gold towers doing the billion-dollar deals, need to practice in a trauma-informed way. Because at the end of the day, all of us, even people who have had really good childhoods, there's still trauma there. It may not be massive trauma, but it's still trauma. And as a lawyer, for us to do our job properly, we really do have to understand the client and the adversaries, whether those adversaries are in a medical malpractice context, a car accident context, a sexual abuse context, or frankly, the other side of a corporate commercial dispute. If you understand what is going on with the players involved and you're able to speak to them in a way that not only makes them feel safe, but gives them power, empowers them, you're actually going to get more of what you need. And if you get more of what you need, you're going to be able to help your client better. And that's how we practice. And, this is something that I know there's a lot of resistance in my profession. A lot of lawyers have told me, I don't need to practice trauma-informed law. That's for you sexual abuse experts. I'm going to argue that it's different. That being said, I kind of laughed when Charles was saying that he listens to audiobooks at 1 or 1.5 maybe, and then Richard does them at 2.5 or something. I listen to them at 0.8, okay? Because I like calm. Just to show you, I'm a little bit weird when it comes to lawyers, but in any event, Practicing trauma-informed law is really important for plaintiffs of personal injury actions. Whether it's because of a car accident, a medical malpractice, or sometimes most evidently in a sexual assault case, it's because that plaintiff comes to us after trauma. Sometimes decades after the trauma, as is the case with many of my childhood plaintiffs, but sometimes it's a week or a month or a year after the trauma. But it's not just that trauma. It's not the trauma that causes that person to come to see the lawyer. There's often other trauma in that person's life. You all know this. Somebody who has suffered a car accident and, loses a leg, for instance, that's huge trauma. But what happens when that trauma is the last trauma that's happened to this person, and they had been in a house fire when they were 17 and lost their mother in that house fire? And when they were 8 and 9 and 10, their teacher was sexually abusing them. That's trauma. It builds. Understanding that person, not just for what is going on because of why they're sitting in your office, but the history behind is important. You are going to better be able to advocate for your client if you really understand that, the pitfalls of that, the good, the bad, and everything. It's very important for people, especially who have had many traumas in their life, to feel safe. That is one of the primary things in our office. We always strive to make people feel safe. That is not only in terms of how we interview people and the words that we say, but it's also how we set up those interviews. If they are in-person interviews, we want them set up in a physical office that is safe for that person. It's really important. Safety also comes in ways of empowering people, explaining to them what's going to happen. The number of times that we have clients call us and say, I don't know what's happening with my case with this other lawyer, so I want another lawyer. And we go into their case and we explain to them what's happening. It's the first time that a lawyer has actually taken the time to say, this is what's happening in your case. This is the good, the bad, this is what needs to be done, this is what we can't do, and whatever else. It happens all the time. And sadly, as a commentary in my personal area of practice, there are more and more lawyers getting into sexual abuse work. And that is partially because MVAs are drying up. There's not as many car accidents. Cars are safer thanks to AI and whatnot. And, our legislations when it comes to car accidents are really bad. So a lot of personal injury lawyers are looking at other practice areas, and sexual abuse happens to be the one that they go into. And they run these cases like car accident cases. You can't run a sexual assault case like a car accident case. And if you try to, you're not going to do a very good job for your client, not only legally, but psychologically for that client. So when clients come to us, we take the same trauma-informed principles that you all use and we apply them to our cases. I guarantee you that we probably do not do it as well as all of you because you're the trained professionals in this, but we try. And it matters because when a survivor or when a victim of a personal injury comes to us, sometimes legal cases replicate that trauma. It increases the trauma. The number of times that we have had people who decline after they come to us because it's right there in their face again and they've got to retell their story and we've got to tell them that, hey, by the way, the defense lawyer is going to get your full personal history, including private health records, financial records, everything will go to defense counsel. That is traumatizing for people. The way that we deal with it is we try to explain what the safeguards are when that happens. We try to explain to them why it's necessary. And we also give them choice. One of the most valuable things that a law professor told me once was that you as a lawyer do not instruct your clients. You as a lawyer take instructions from your clients. A lot of lawyers I've noticed fail to understand what the difference is there. I am not the one who tells my client what to do. My client tells me what to do. My job is to provide that client with the best possible advice that I can in a way that empowers them to understand the process and to make healthy, good decisions for their life and their family and themselves. That is why sometimes clients will do things that I scratch my head at. I say to them, look, if we go to trial, you're going to probably get 700,000, 800,000, $1 million, 2 million, whatever else. The offer on the table is only 400,000. Let me take you to trial. I'll get you that money. But for a lot of people, it's not about the money. And for a lot of people, the trauma and the weight in going ahead and waiting for that trial and being put through a trial, it's not worth it. We've got a trial going on right now where my client, our client, was severely, brutally attacked from behind by her neighbor of 20 years. And the only reason why we're at trial is because that neighbor refuses to take any kind of liability, any kind of accounting, notwithstanding that he was convicted, notwithstanding that his defense was struck. We're at trial because he's forced us to go to trial. And I look at this person and the emotion on her face as she's going through this and as she's hearing about all of this and everything is horrible. She would have absolutely wanted to deal with this in a different way. But sometimes we have to do it. But when we do, we try to make it in such a way that the client knows what's going on. We tell them minutely every single step of the process. You're going to walk into the courtroom and you're going to sit here. And then this is going to happen. And then that is going to happen. And as best as possible, we will allow that person to change things up in any way that makes them more comfortable. This is a lot easier, not in a trial. In a trial, we're very regulated in what we do. But in any case, we often will give that person choice as to whether or not we do it this way or that way. Sometimes there is no choice, but when there is, we try to give it to them. We empower people. One of the things that's important and that is relevant right now, and Charles touched on this, is that the government is thinking about changing the way that lawyers deal with cases. We call it the rules of civil procedures. And that is, everything from how a trial is done to what information has to be done, given to the other side beforehand. Charles mentions that discoveries, and I think a lot of you are familiar with the discovery process, that's going to be eliminated, all of that. One of the things that concerns me the most in these rules is that they are far from trauma informed. In fact, I think they are essentially the epitome of not trauma informed, including, for instance, and those of you who work with sexual assault survivors will be up in arms when you understand that this is coming. I have to give the alleged abuser, sometimes convicted abuser, all of my clients' personal health and financial information prior to a case happening. I send a letter, I wait for a response, and then I send that information to the actual, possibly oftentimes convicted abuser. That person at that point likely does not have a lawyer. Yeah, I see the stunned faces. This is what is proposed to be happening. There are a lot of other things that are a problem in that, including, for instance, I also have to provide affidavits or will say statements from witnesses prior to the commencement of legal proceedings. So, if I've got a client that says, little Bobby was also abused with me, are you still in touch with little Bobby? Yeah, he's on my Facebook. I, at that point, then theoretically have to go and knock on little Bobby's door and say, hey, hi, I'm here to get your evidence when it comes to the abuse that you suffered 40 years ago. What if little Bobby isn't ready? Exactly. So what does that mean for you? It means a lot of different things for you. One, be aware that these changes may be coming. I promise you, most lawyers are up in arms in this, and we are trying desperately to get the government to see the light. But what you can do is also understand what these changes are and do what you can do either personally or through whatever organizations or anything else that you have, and say to the government, this is wrong. The consultation process ends at mid-June. These rules are likely going to take into effect in January. If you want more information of this, please come find me afterwards. But this is something that is really important for everybody because it's going to touch everything that we all do. It's going to force a very different way of interaction with people, and it's going to create a system where justice is not served, it is denied to a lot of people because a lot of people will not want to do this, will not want to pursue their rights to get compensation from their abusers, their victims and whatnot. And this is true not just for sexual assault survivors, but car accidents. As somebody who's injured in a car accident, do I want to give my personal records to the drunk driver who rammed into my car? I don't know. I don't want to do that. What's that person going to do with those records? All of that. It's just, it boggles my mind. But in any event, it's important to understand that, justice is not what just happens in the courtrooms and in lawyers' office. It's about how people are supposed to be treated throughout the journey. So treating people in a trauma-informed way is really important. What you can do is help a client understand that they've got rights, even with their own lawyers, to be treated in a way that is helping them through this very, very difficult time of life. And it doesn't take much. We all know what being trauma-informed means. It doesn't take much. It really doesn't. It makes my job easier in a lot of ways because I don't have that adversarial relationship with my clients sometimes when I'm pushing them for answers. They come to know who I am. They come to understand that, there are certain things that we can do and certain things that we can't, but that they can always ask me questions and we can always go forward. It's up to you to help clients understand that they have a right to be treated that way from everybody that is involved in their care, whether it's a legal professional, treatment professionals, everybody. So those are my thoughts. I know it was a bit rambling, but I think the best thing that I can do for you is to tell you that there are trauma-informed lawyers out there. We do exist, and we love what we do, no matter how difficult and emotionally gut-wrenching it is for us, especially our sexual assault survivors. But I argue for, frankly, any personal injury lawyer. We do exist. We thank you so much for all the work that you do. We could not help our clients without all of you helping our clients first. You are the first line, and thank you very much for all you do. And like I said, come find me if you want more information about the proposed rules. Thank you. Thank you.
As it relates to compassion fatigue, Brenda Agnew is a passionate advocate and proud mother. Brenda is committed to supporting individuals with cerebral palsy and child-onset disabilities. As a former Gluckstein client, she now serves as a client liaison, guiding families through their legal journeys. Beyond her role, she champions accessibility and inclusion through leadership positions with Easter Seals Ontario, the Halton Catholic District Board, and various volunteer organizations. And beyond that, she's the marketing manager too. Her roles keep expanding. And so today's event wouldn't happen without her and her team of Isabella and Kate. So congratulations.
It's not lost on me that I'm following three lawyers in my presentation, and I'm talking about resiliency. Hi, everyone. As Diane mentioned, my name is Brenda Agnew, and I'm a proud member of the Gluckstein team. But I'm here today to talk more about another really proud role, and that's mine of a caregiver. And I'm going to try to put this in the context of the importance of resiliency. We talk a lot about compassion fatigue, obviously, and we talk a lot about caregiver burnout, but I want to talk a little bit about the importance of resiliency, because I think that often gets missed. I think a lot of the times we're already at the point of crisis, and we're already at the point where we're experiencing compassion fatigue, and we're already experiencing caregiver burnout. And some of the things that I've tried to do to build up a little bit more resiliency so I don't find myself in that situation. And so for those of you who do not know, my younger son, McLean, is almost 18 years old. He'll be 18 in August, and he has a diagnosis of cerebral palsy, and he's also profoundly deaf. He is a surviving twin who was born at 29 weeks gestation. He spent 3 months in the NICU, where he ultimately developed jaundice, was not treated, and was left with a brain injury due to neurotoxicity. I have to say that I honestly thought the worst thing that I ever had to navigate was the loss of my son, Braden, in utero, and a roller coaster ride in the early months of McLean's life. But then the diagnoses started coming. Can we put a picture up? Thanks. I know, right? But McLean is not a diagnosis. He is a smart, funny, handsome individual and so much more. But he is also self-reliant on someone else for his every single need. A nose itch, a sip of a drink, fixing an errant sock, pulling down a sleeve, every little thing, 24/7 for 18 years so far. But McLean has taken me on a life-altering and humbling caregiving journey, and this is not a role that anyone plans for. And the reality is I don't have the option to step away from it. Caregiving is constant. It doesn't stop. I can't call in sick for caregiving. I can't stay in bed. There are no vacation days. And while the lucky few of us do get some chances to physically take a break, be a respite here and there, we never get a break mentally or emotionally. And that is often where the toll takes us as caregivers. So I've had to find ways not only to survive this caregiver journey, but to attempt to thrive so that my son can also thrive. Resilience has been my lifeline to try and get ahead of the burnout, to try to avoid compassion fatigue. And today I want to share how I've worked to build and strengthen some of those pieces in the face of everyday challenges. So as we heard this morning, and as we heard a little bit earlier, and with my shared experiences I just mentioned, caregiving is ultimately a 24/7 commitment. And I want to preface that by saying, listen, all of us play some sort of role as a caregiver, whether we're, parent to neurotypical children, whether we are assisting our parents as they navigate, into their elderly journey. I mean, we all, just by nature, we all have somewhat of a caregiving journey. But when I talk here today, I'm talking about a very different caregiving journey. This is, as I said, a 24/7 commitment, and it's layered with physical, emotional, and financial demands. From personal experience, caregivers can face exhaustion and burnout, as I mentioned, from a never-ending list of responsibilities. Financial strain, managing the unexpected expenses. Physical tolls that can impact our own health. Feelings of guilt when prioritizing ourselves, even for a moment. Uncertainty and fear for the future, which is where I live. Systems that fail caregivers, making navigating support services overwhelming. And resilience isn't something that we're born with. It's a skill that can be developed, that has to be developed. We don't have any options. Self-care alone will not get us through, and giving up, as I said before, is just simply not an option. I've learned that building resiliency isn't about quick fixes. It's about creating lasting strength and support systems, because I can't do it by myself. So here's what I've learned along the way. You can change the picture if you like. Not that he's, nothing that. So I'll talk about this in a second. So practice self-compassion first. And maybe some people are surprised I didn't say self-care, and I'll get to self-care. But honestly, self-care is a little bit down my list because it's a little bit harder. But practicing self-compassion for me has been ultimately one of the most important things, because caregivers often set impossibly high standards for themselves. But it's okay to feel overwhelmed, and it's okay to feel like you don't have it all together, whether that be sometimes or always. But I make an effort to be kind to myself in those moments, like giving myself permission to feel without any judgment, but also pushing through by reframing challenges using positive self-talk. I put away the I should haves. I didn't apply for this job, and I have no formal training. So I am going to screw it up, and I'm going to screw it up a lot. And so using the would haves or should haves are just not helpful. I remind myself that you've navigated tough moments before, and you're going to do it again. And I try to talk to myself in those moments like I would talk to someone else, because why do I find ways to comfort them, but I can never find ways to seem to do that for myself? I often try to take a moment to really look back at where we started, because it is important to see how far that I have come as a caregiver in my caregiver journey. And you know what? I've come a long way. And this helps put the overwhelming moments of feeling useless at bay. I remember my mom telling me when my older son was a baby, because my poor older son gets no attention, but I remember my mom telling me when my older son was a baby and I was in the throes of postpartum depression, and she said, Brenda, you got him up, you got him fed, and you got him changed. And that is to be celebrated, especially when you are struggling yourself today. And I won't lie, I still 20 years later will say this to myself, and sometimes out loud, and people are like, she has a baby? And I say, you got him up and you changed and you fed him. And I use that as a metaphor for surviving a tough day. And some days it really is literally about surviving the day. I've also learned that comparison is the thief of joy. So we can't do it. I can't look at social media. I can't look at the people around me. I can't look at what I'm perceiving them to be accomplishing. I can't look at how well put together they are. I can't do that, because if I look at that, all I do is look at my own failings. And I will tell the same things to my friends. I'm like, don't look at what Susie's doing, because you don't know what's happening to Susie behind closed doors. And yet I find myself often doing that, and I remind myself daily that comparison is the thief of joy. Building a support network, and this is where many of you will come in, is you play a unique role in some of the services that you provide, where you have the ability to connect people who are going through a journey with resources and supports and people around them, and perhaps peers and other people who have been through the same thing, because connection is really powerful. And finding people who truly understand what caregiving entails can transform feelings of isolation into camaraderie. Joining a support group and reaching out to a trusted friend or mentor has been life-changing for me. And it's okay to tell people that you're feeling alone and that you need help. And there's zero shame in sharing your fears, your worries, your struggles, your questions, your ideas, and more. And if that is what will help you get over the hurdle so that you can move forward, then find a way to do that. Find that person, find those people. Now I bring it down to self-care a little bit. Again, people are often surprised that that's not the top of my list. And I try to say this without an eye roll, because self-care is not easy. And if I have one more person tell me that I should take a bath and light a candle, because I light all the candles and I take all the baths, and at the end of the day, what I have going on doesn't go away. And does it give me a little bit of momentary reprieve? Yes, and that is important, and I don't want to downplay that. But the reality is that, self-care is not easy. It's important, it's essential, it's not selfish, but it's not always easy. And so what I do try to do is I try to be realistic in my self-care, and I try to do it ahead of time. Again, I try not to live in a moment of crisis or chaos. And so I sneak in a walk, or I go for a massage, because, I do have the luxury of having benefits to cover that. I binge way too many shows instead of doing laundry. And I've recently started to commit to twice weekly workouts because I have a son that I'm going to have to carry for a really long time, and he's getting heavy. And so I do tell people that when they're looking at self-care, it has to be what they can manage, it has to be what's realistic for them, and it has to be something for them that they don't have to make burdensome or cumbersome. It just has to be something easy that they find joy in, that gives them a moment to regroup and refresh and then move forward. Focus on what you can control, because caregiving doesn't just feel overwhelming, it really is overwhelming, and it is outside our control. I have learned to focus on the small actionable steps that I can manage each day. Everything what led me to this was out of my control. Not a single thing that I could have done differently would have landed me anywhere different than where I am now. And everything that comes along the way is usually out of my control. And so, it's really just trying to organize a small part of my day to think about those pieces so that it can shift my perspective. being a control freak, this is the bane of my existence, but it is so very, very important. And again, it's where I take a look at what are the things that are within my control? What are the things that I can do that, can make things a little bit easier and not focus on the things that are out of control? And I know that that sounds so much easier to do, but it actually is not. It's very simple in your day to look at the things that you can control. And then seeking professional help when needed. Caregiving can take a serious toll on mental health, and reaching out for professional help, whether it's therapy, a counselor, or a social worker, can be a vital step. And I would encourage the professionals in this room, if you can find ways to assist people who are struggling to find access to free resources, please do that. Not everybody has access, unfortunately, to accident benefits or benefit program at work, and they find themselves without access to those benefits. Seek out community resources such as local caregiving organizations, respite caregiver services, or support groups. Many communities can offer free or low-cost programs that can provide assistance and give people the much-needed interventions that they need. So I truly believe that by incorporating these strategies into my daily life, I have strengthened my resilience while I continue to give care and support to those who need me the most. And also, sometimes it's the smallest habits that make the biggest difference. So take advantage of everything you have to make things easier. Order groceries online. Be okay with a sink full of dishes. Take help when offered. Ask for help when it's not offered. Move the to-do list to another day. Give yourself permission to mess up and move on. And this is a really, really big one, and this is why I have the picture here. Celebrate the little wins. Whether it's a quiet morning with a tea on my porch or tackling a task I've been putting off, a small advocacy win, or McLean learning something new, or going to the prom like he did last week can be the key. If you get in the mindset of celebrating these little small wins, they will stay with you when you seem to be having a day of tough losses. Thank you very much.